would like to introduce Sandra Espada Santos, and she is the facilitator for the U.S. Virgin Islands College and Career Readiness Research Alliance, which is one of the 8 research alliances supported by REL Northeastern Islands. And Sandra, I want to hand it over to you and Helen and Denise this afternoon and wish you a good session. And we'll also want to make sure Sandra has, just because we're a global webinar here doesn't mean we've mastered the mute button, so we want to make sure.
Thank you, Peter. That was a great reminder because I was have my speech. Thanks a lot. Right. I'm sorry all about this. I am Sandra Espada. I am the RELNI liaison to USVI and Puerto Rico, and I am also the facilitator to the Virgin Islands College and Career Readiness Research Alliance that RELNI is supporting in the U.S. Virgin Islands territory. I am sorry not to be able with the group that is meeting in the University of the Virgin Islands today in their St. Croix campus for the peer network of the striving readers. They are having their annual meeting in that location, and this session is part of their meeting. And I wanted to be there, but some major forces didn't allow me to do so. My apologies. But we have had great colleagues in the university supporting us with the technology and in the coordination of the agenda for today, for this session. I want to acknowledge the support of the Education Commissioner of the Virgin Islands, Dr. Sharon McCollum, also of the Assistant Commissioner, Ms. Charmaine Hobson-Johnson, of the St. Croix Superintendent, Ms. Colleen Williams, and to the Peer Exchange Network Program Manager that has also allowed us to be a part of this meeting, Ms. Rosemary Fennell, and a special thanks to Ms. Denise Gomes. She is our local hero in the coordination of this event. So thank you all for allowing us to be with you today. The agenda that we have planned for this meeting today is a 1-hour session. In a couple of minutes, I will hand this session to Dr. Helen Duffy, Senior Research Analyst at the American Institute for Research and also a RELNI colleague. Helen will be providing the main presentation on the topic of developing culturally responsive college and career readiness literacy skills and why the links to what's happening in the Virgin Islands over the P16 collaborative that they are developing is important. We will also invite Ms. Denise Gomes from the Department of Education in the Virgin Islands to share with us some reactions and local implications about to the P16 collaborative and the work they're doing this year in particular, based on the remarks from Dr. Duffy. And then we will, like the group in the webinar, to participate using the technology that this platform allows. As Peter Orn was explaining, there are several ways you can do it. You can use the chat room. You can use the raise the hand, the little body that is on the top of the screen, and let us know that you want to communicate in some way, and we will find a way to hear your comment. We want to hear or to read your comment. We really want to engage you in this conversation. My welcome to all the colleagues from the Virgin Islands that are in here and from other jurisdictions that have taken time away from their DC Lives to participate here. Moving along, let me talk very quickly about what the College and Career Readiness Research Alliance in the Virgin Islands is doing. We have been supporting the Department of Education in the territory and other education stakeholders since 2012. This is our 5th year there, and the focus of the Alliance has been throughout this year is to support the establishment of a P20 workshop, but that's what the goal says, pipeline to support the preparation of students for post-secondary success. So far, as I already mentioned, the territory is well underway with what they have been calling the P16 Collaborative, which is work done in coordination with the Department of Education and the University of the Virgin Islands. And as we will talk later today, they are focusing this year specifically on an activity that is looking to propose recommendations for a strategy to support the recruitment, retention, and development of teachers and educator leaders in the territory. We, as an alliance, have also provided, through the activities that the RELNI fund, the applied research and analytic research and technical support on indicators and measurements of college and career readiness and success. There are a couple of specific studies and workshops that we have provided. All of these activities are done in coordination with the Department of Education and several staff individuals from the department, and with the collaboration of other entities in the territory, including the University of the VI, the Board of Education, and the Community Foundation that has been a great partner to this alliance for many years, and also to the RELNI. The core planning group, which is the group that provides strategic thinking to the work that we do, this year is composed by the individuals that are listed in this slide: the commissioner, the assistant commissioner, the superintendents of the school districts, the director of the Planning, Research, and Evaluation Office at the Department of Ed, the vice president for academic affairs of the University of VI, and more recently, the new chair of the Board of Education. We have invited her to participate, and it's tentative, but I really like to have her participating here, so that's why I am including her, Ms. Mary Moorhead. Very briefly, again, specifically on what the USVI is doing on the P16 Collaborative, which is like the reason of this session today. They ask us to provide support in developing a teacher pipeline strategy for the territory. To do that, this collaborative that is coordinated by the commissioner and the assistant commissioner and the provost of the university, they have identified a very interesting group of stakeholders in the territory. They have already met and identified the work plan that they want to develop in the next few months, and their goal is to provide policy recommendations to the Department of Education on the topic of teachers and educators, leaders, entrance and retaining of them in the territory. The work of the Alliance is to provide the research and the resources that are specific to the topics that they are exploring, and providing planning tools and facilitating their meetings. During that process, we have counted with the expertise of Dr. Helen Duffy and Ms. Beth Bradway, and that's why Helen is your speaker today. She wants to address the topic of the culturally responsive college and career readiness literacy skills, and how the work of the teacher's pipeline can be influenced by those. So Helen is, as I mentioned, a senior researcher at the American Institute for Research, and also a member of the RELNI network. She has extensive experience providing technical assistance and designing and preparing large-scale evaluations. She has worked with the National High School Centers, and she is an expert on the topic of college and career readiness. So without further ado, I know that I am missing a lot of your work, Helen, but this is a short introduction, so with my apologies, I'll leave the audience to you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. So we have several goals today. One is to just provide a little bit of background research related to literacy and its role in college and career readiness in the USVI context, and to think about the ways in which culturally responsive literacy instruction can help develop those skills in our students. So I've been actually asked to connect the dots across 4 different topics. So I'll lay those topics out. One is literacy, one is college and career readiness and success, the third is culturally responsive instruction, and the fourth is the work that we're doing in the USVI around the teacher pipeline. So I'll begin by talking a little bit about literacy in the 21st century, connect those notions to culturally responsive instruction, and then we'll talk about and think about together what the implications are for what teachers should know and be able to do, particularly in the context of the USVI. So I want to get started with a video that I hope to use that can demonstrate some of what I mean by 21st century literacy tools and practices. We've been granted permission to use the video by the Center for Digital Storytelling, and as you watch and listen to the video, I want to ask you to think about literacy and where in this video clip you see evidence of literate activity. And as you think about these things, I want to feel free to respond in the chat box on the bottom left portion of your screen. And if you've joined by phone, I need to ask you to mute your telephone and turn on your computer speakers, because that's how you're going to hear the video that we're going to watch. The video clip is just a little under 4 minutes, so let's go ahead and launch that.
My dad asked me if I wanted to go with him to let it go, but I said no, I wanted to hang with my friends. I had shown the fish to my grandpa, and he said it was too bony. I just wasted my time catching a fish that I wouldn't get to eat. I've been fishing since I was 18 months old, when my dad would take me to Lake Washington on the weekends. I like fishing with him even though we hardly ever get to talk. I love the smell of fish cooking on the stove or over a fire. I like watching him prepare the fish and cook them. The other thing I like about fishing is the peacefulness. No one's asking me to do anything. I love just being alone with my dad. Last summer I caught an 18-inch carp. We were on a rafting trip and we stopped at a clay cliff to swim. My dad fished while my sisters and I swam. Then I took over the pole. I caught 3 rainbow trout. Only one was the keeper. I cast it out one more time and let the line sit for a while. The current took the line down. I reeled it in slowly, and I noticed that the line was kind of heavy. Maybe it was dragging on the bottom of the deep clay bank. The tip of the pole started bending over, so the top was almost even with the reel. Maybe it was a snag. I tried to break the line, and my dad came running to see what I had on the other end. I reeled faster and harder, until an 18-inch golden carp came to the surface. The biggest fish I've ever caught. Grandpa said it was too bony to eat, but the fish had already given its life. So my dad asked me if I wanted to go with him to let the body go down May Creek. But I said no. A couple of months later I met this native man, Roger, and he told me the story of the salmon people, and the one boy who didn't return the salmon bones to the river, but threw them in the bushes instead. The people were born without bones in the salmon village until he went back and took the salmon bones and put them back into the river himself. And that's when I regretted it. Not going with my dad to put the carp back in the creek, because it gave its life for nothing, and I didn't show it respect.
Great, thank you so much for that. So ideally, well, first let me just say you now need to turn off your computer speakers before you unmute your phone lines if you're listening through the phone. So ideally, I'd be with you in person to engage in a conversation about what you all noticed in the video. But because of the kind of technical limitations of this medium and the fact that we're streaming across multiple sites, I can only see your entries in the chat box. And I'm not currently seeing any entries in the chat box. So I'll just go ahead and begin sharing some of my own observations about the video. So the first thing I want to note are the tools that Cody used to produce this particular piece, or multimedia tools. Computer, photos, sound effects, music. And in addition to more traditional paper and print texts, students are going to need to learn how to engage with these kinds of texts critically, both to become critical consumers and skilled creators of these texts. And he uses these tools to really focus his audience. For example, when he includes the sounds of the fishing reel in the background as he continues to tell the story. He also demonstrates a number of skills related to narrative, including, for example, the use of devices that increase suspense. Maybe the hook was dragging on the bottom, maybe it was, and so the use of that device kind of increases the suspense. And he opens the narrative, interestingly, with one version of the tale. He says, "My dad asked me if I wanted to go with him to let it go. We don't even know what it is yet. And he says, but I said no and went to hang out with my friends. I had shown the fish to my grandpa, and he said it was too bony. I just wasted my time catching a fish that I wouldn't get to eat. That's one version of this tale. But then what he does is he goes on to sort of complicate that version. And as the narrative progresses, we see this initial version get quite a bit more complex. Doing so, I think, demonstrates that stories of events in our lives take many shapes and have multiple versions, multiple interpretations. However, perhaps even more powerfully, Cody's piece demonstrates his capacity to listen across generations and, in fact, to take to heart what he hears and learns as a result. So let's see. Now I need to go back and advance my slides. So I see the comment that the photos were descriptive as to identifying how big the fish was. I think those things are true. What happens in these multimedia texts is the producers of these texts need to think long and hard about how one sort of avenue for telling the story kind of complements or well, how it complements the story and the purposes of the narrative. So I want to talk a little bit about literacy, what it is, what it isn't, using Cody's video kind of as an anchor for discussion. And the National Council of Teachers of English defined literacy as a collection of cultural and communicative practices that are shared among members of a particular group. And if we agree with that definition, it stands to reason that as a society, or as society and technology change, so does literacy. And decades of research point to the important observation that literacy cannot be understood apart from the social contexts in which it develops. I think probably some of you are familiar with the work of Shirley Bryce Heath. Maybe less familiar is a little bit earlier work done by Scribner and Cole, who sought to test whether school-based literacy could explain variations in how adults engage in tasks that require them to use abstractions, logic, and memory, because there were people who were claiming that literacy conferred upon those who were literate kind of advanced cognitive skills. And so Scribner and Cole wanted to find out if this was actually the case. So what they did is they designed a research project with the VI people, which is a small Liberian population. And in their research, what they did is they asked participants, some of whom had more years of formal schooling than others, to perform several tasks. And they hoped to gain a better understanding of how different social situations might affect and change human thought. What they discovered was that, interestingly, literacy helped the most not with the task itself, but with the explanations that participants provided about those tasks. And I quote from them. They say, the most impressive finding is that formal schooling with instruction in English increased the ability to provide a verbal explanation of the principles involved in performing various tasks. Justification given by schooled individuals were more by others. So Scribner and Cole and many researchers who followed found then that literacy should be approached as a set of socially organized practices which make use of symbol systems and technologies for producing and disseminating it. So again, think back to the tools that Cody had at his disposal to tell the story that he told. So fast forward to the early part of this century, to a report authored by Biancarosa and Snow called Reading Next, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. According to that report, while our focus on increasing the numbers of third graders who read at grade level presents significant challenges, those challenges have sort of distracted us from perhaps the greater challenge of getting students to comprehension, reading to learn, and reading in the content areas. According to that and other more recent reports, literacy is more than just a set of discrete practices. Readers approach text with different stances, motivations, purposes, and expectations to form what O'Brien, Stewart, and Beach call a more ecological approach to conceiving of literacy that can begin to account for its situated nature. So the world we live in and the young people we teach are dynamic. In school settings, we focus our attention oftentimes on school-based literacy practices. We focus on discrete skills such as decoding, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, background knowledge as tools for literacy and comprehension. And I don't deny that the importance and utility of those skills and those distinctions, because people who read proficiently draw upon those skills automatically and must be taught and have time to practice in order to learn those skills. And yet the 21st century technologies are redefining the skills that students need in the world. Web-based technologies, for example, challenge traditional skills such as left to right and top to bottom processing of text. And they're nearly always characterized by hyperlinks that draw readers into deeper and more specialized content, not in the linear way of printed texts. So for nearly a decade, many researchers have been saying that traditional paradigms of literacy need to accommodate these new texts. The earlier slide I cited work of Donna Alverman and others who make this claim. And as we'll be reminded in a moment, the Common Core standards are actually also an attempt to acknowledge these new textual landscapes. As Thomas Carroll, who is past president of the National Commission on Teaching and America's Future, points out, learning is no longer preparation for the job, it is the job. In a world in which information expands exponentially, today's students must learn to be knowledgeable navigators, seeking and finding information from multiple sources, evaluating it, making sense of it, understanding how to turn information into knowledge and knowledge into action. So what does it mean to be college and career ready? Well, I mean, a number of people have weighed in on this. Our knowledge in the 21st century economy, in this global economy we live in, demands a different kind of preparation than has historically been available to students. Some folks are calling this deeper learning, a term that was coined by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, I think around 2010. And this set of educational outcomes includes 6 interrelated core competencies: mastery of academic content, development of critical thinking and problem solving, the ability to work collaboratively, effective oral and written communication, learning how to learn, and developing and maintaining an academic mindset. The 3 buckets that you see, the cognitive, interpersonal, and intrapersonal and interpersonal, are the 3 buckets that the National Research Council came up with. But the work of the Hewlett Foundation actually maps pretty nicely onto these 3 buckets of work here. And the Common Core state standards represent another parallel effort to define the skills students require for success in the 21st century. I selected this particular excerpt from the Common Core Anchor Standards, which describe broad standards and define the skills and understandings that all students must demonstrate. Note here the importance of evaluating content, understanding the role of diverse media, and the multiple genres that students must read and produce, including analysis, reflection, research, and the like. All of these things have major implications not only for the way teaching and learning is structured in K-12 classrooms, but also for the way we prepare and support ongoing learning and development for teachers. So let me illustrate this using a couple of print texts, which you're probably not going to be able to read very well because of the size of the font. And we don't have a lot of time today to talk about this, how this relatively simple text works, but I want to illustrate some of the complexities of what teachers need to know and be able to do using this text and a couple others that follow. So typically what we do is we tell students essays have to have 5 paragraphs, and they include an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And yet if we study real texts, especially those that students might be familiar with, they rarely fall into that organizational structure. Furthermore, we often neglect to account for a text purpose, its intended audience, or the more specific features of introduction, body, and concluding paragraphs. So the text that appears on this slide is a student problem solution essay. Generically, it does include an introduction, body, and a conclusion. And yet if we look at the sentence that make up the opening paragraph, we should ask ourselves what specific role does each of those sentences perform. So the first one identifies the topic or situation. The next 3 describe the topic in more detail. And the final sentence of the opening paragraph states the problem. In order to use texts as models for students, teachers must understand more deeply what makes these texts work, or sometimes what makes them not work so well. So here's an example from an introductory paragraph. How would you feel if you knew at this moment that some criminal is writing your name, address, and social security number on a credit card, or on credit card applications, and plans to charge thousands of dollars worth of merchandise on those credit cards? So this is one approach to writing an introduction. It opens with a provocative question. And for certain purposes and certain audiences, this particular strategy might be a great way to go. The second example is about the same topic but uses a different strategy. So identity fraud is the fastest growing crime in the United States. In 2004, over 9 million Americans, or approximately 1 person in 24, became victims of identity fraud, identity theft at a cost to the economy of $52.6 billion. So this second example opens with a surprising fact. Digging into the ways in which these texts are structured is just one of the many important aspects that teachers need to be able to do as we help students understand how these texts work, so that they can then make these intentional choices themselves as they create their own texts. Again, I think the Common Core state standards have tried to make this clear, that students need opportunities to understand how texts work in multiple disciplines and not just in English language arts. So here, students could be asked to notice these different opening strategies and think about when one might be more appropriate than another. So where and how does culturally responsive teaching come into play? Well, I think if we agree that social context and purposes are so important for literacy and learning, having a deeper understanding of those social contexts and purposes is key. It's essential if students are going to engage in these practices with us. So what is culturally responsive teaching? If you look at some of the blogs and some of the questions that people ask about it, it includes, but is much, much more than just selecting texts that reflect the backgrounds and experiences of our students. Culturally responsive teaching means connecting students' cultural knowledge, prior experience, and performance styles to the academic knowledge and tools that we're trying to help them acquire. Culturally responsive teachers understand that mastering academic or school-based knowledge involves not one but multiple avenues to mastering information. Culturally responsive classrooms so that students can take ownership of their own learning and that of their peers. It requires explicit instruction around ways to explore and express differences of opinion. And those and culturally responsive teachers are socially conscious and have affirming views of students from diverse backgrounds. They see themselves as responsible for and capable of bringing about change to make schools more equitable. They understand how learners construct knowledge and are capable of promoting knowledge construction. They know about the lives of their students, and they design instruction that builds on what their students already know. Decades of research have pointed to the out-of-school literacy practices of communities that have historically been poorly served by our educational systems. And these researchers have tried to encourage teachers to build upon those out-of-school practices for school success. It's something I've called taking an anthropological stance in our teaching, where we learn with and from our students. And it draws upon what Gonzalez, Moll, and Amonte have called the funds of knowledge that students bring to school with them. So if you didn't already know it, I hope you can see how challenging this teaching endeavor is. As literacy teachers, we need to know about those components of literacy, the phonemic, lexical, orthographic, semantic, and syntactic systems that comprise language use. But we also need to understand how those systems are used in practice, not just in schools, but in the world outside of school. We need deep understandings of genre and how language works, or why and how it sometimes fails to achieve its desired purpose. In order for students to become critical consumers and producers of text in whatever media, we need to be the bridge between the strengths and skills they bring with them, the acquisition of academic literacy, and some of the broader purposes of literacy we encounter in the world around us. So it isn't an either-or proposition, it's both and. So, through the REL, Beth Ratway, Sandra, and I have been working with the USVI and the P16 Collaborative for about 2.5 years. But it's only in the last probably 10 months that we have begun to focus on the role of the teacher pipeline in the USVI. In a moment, I'll turn this over to my colleague, Denise Gomes, who's going to discuss the most recent work of the task force. But for now, I hope you've seen some of the connections across the ways we define what it means to be literate in the 21st century, and how those definitions shape teaching and learning in school, and define what teachers need to know and be able to do. Narrow definitions of literacy make a deficit approach to teaching and learning much more likely, because they shape literacy as something students need and don't have. But if we learn to see literacy as a complex set of skills that students acquire and use across multiple contexts, It actually makes the identification of student strengths a lot easier. However, there's no getting around the fact that teachers must be learners themselves. So we need to learn about content, about language, about child development, about new and emerging genres, about our students and the communities where we live and teach. And attending to the ways in which we prepare and support teachers in this endeavor is essential. So the USVI has taken up this challenge across the P16 spectrum. The knowledge and skills that teachers require to do these things well take years to develop and fine-tune, which is why we're looking at the education of teachers across their career trajectories, from initial recruitment and selection to leadership development as mentors or teacher educators themselves. So with that, I know I've covered an awful lot of ground here in a very short period of time, but I wanted to be sure that I left enough time for you in the VI to hear from Ms. Gomes about the task force work, and also to have an opportunity to engage in some conversation about that work. So with that, I'm going to pass it off, Ms. Gomes, to you. Please, again, don't forget that phone lines need to be muted so that you can use your mic on your computer. Thanks.
Can you hear me, Sandra?
I can hear you, but it's very soft.
How about now? Helen, Sandra, can you hear me? All right, great. So I'm going to go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone who's tuned in and who's with me in the Virgin Islands. First, I wanted to say thank you to the REL team for the work that you're doing with us and the work that you'll continue to do with us. It's actually exciting work because it's a long-term effort. It's not something that we're going to see results right away. And so we're in it for the long haul, and I'm looking forward to continuing the work with you. So my job today was to talk to you about the P16 Collaborative and the teaching pipeline here in the territory. I'll start with the P16 Collaborative. The P16 Collaborative is an ideal situation because so many times as a teacher we hear the UVI talk about the high school's not doing their job, and the high school say junior high, they're not doing their job, and then junior high blame it on the elementary school teachers and the elementary school, preschool, etc. So what we're doing is we're being more proactive, and we're getting all stakeholders to the table, and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk, how can we make this process better? What can we do to strengthen our kindergarten, our preschoolers coming into kindergarten? What can we do to keep them transitioning from one level to the other with the skills that they need to be successful? So the P16 Collab is not just about education. It's a more holistic approach to the child. So we have agencies involved with us, such as Human Services for Head Start, the Department of Labor, because we have to prepare our students for college and career readiness support, University of the Virgin Islands, Department of Health, Department of Justice. So it's a team of people coming together to
Hi, Denise, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm having some trouble hearing you. Is there any way you can hold the mic a little bit closer to your mouth?
I can try. How is this?
Oh, much, much, much better. Thank you.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So it's a holistic approach to the educational process involving multiple agencies coming together to the table. This brings me to think about Vivis, which is an excellent opportunity for us. It's the virtual system where we're going to be able to pull data from all those agencies, justice, human services, labor, education, and in the long term, we'll be able to look at a student and see his or her entire history from Head Start, from birth really, all the way to whatever job he or she might be holding as an adult. So again, it's a long-term effort. It's something that is very holistic, and it's, like I said, a very exciting opportunity for us. The teacher leader pipeline is something that we just recently started, maybe 2 months ago, starting to meet about the teacher leader pipeline. And what we have in the territory is a situation where we have a very high turnover. Our teachers aren't staying with us the way we need them to. We're bringing teachers from foreign places. And so we need to find a way that we can recruit teachers, select the teachers that we need to work with our students, train them the way we want them to deliver their services, and then you know, continue the process of helping them so that they can stay with us, the retention, so that we can have strong instruction for our students. And then, of course, we talk about the you know, keeping the teachers there with us long enough and creating leaders within the classroom, not pulling the leaders out of the classroom, but creating leaders within the classroom who can continue to help sharpen those incoming teachers and existing teachers to provide the best service for our students. Of course, a very important part of this, this whole effort, especially the P16 effort, is the career and technical aspect. It's important that we have strong career and technical education for our students so that we're preparing them while they're young to be productive and productive employees in the workforce. So that's another part of the P16 collaborative that I think is very important, the career and college and career and technical education component as well. So it's, like I said, it's a long-term effort. We're starting the work, and it's going to be something that, like, is going to connect the entire community for the betterment of our children now and in the future. So my presentation is quite brief, and I am ready to turn it back over to the REL team. And again, thank you for working with us on this presentation today and being a part of the VI Pen. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Denise. Now we're ready, I think, to have some conversation. Sandra, I think you're going to facilitate this part. Is that correct?
I will. I've been asking the participants of the webinar that are online to send questions or comments. We haven't got anything yet, but as we are thinking on the information that Helen has provided on how to think about literacy and the impact on the students' preparation and how the educational scenarios should be set up to support the students and the teachers. I'd like to invite you to think on your own settings. How have you approached these issues? If you have experiences to share, we know that there are attendees to the webinar that are not from the USVI, and that is great because one of the objectives of this session was to have this exchange of information, how you are doing or do you perceive the work is has to be done. So feel free to type in your questions or to speak up. If you are in the room, Denise is over there, and it will be easier if you can talk directly to her, and we will find a way through the technology to share your comments to others. Let me pause here to see if there is any comment or question from you, from the group. Denise, it's very hard to do this from the distance. If you see any hand raised or if you get any questions, just go and let us know.
We seem to be good here. There are no questions. Oh, wait a minute. Yes.
There are some that are typing, so let us give this person time to write, and I will read them.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Ramona Chauvin is asking more information about the CTE work. Is this the CTE on the USVI in particular? Can you talk about that, Denise? Or is Ramona, are you referring to this question to Helen? Please be more specific so we can address it. Ella May Daniel is asking, with regard to the teacher leader pipeline, what assistance is needed. What I can answer this, and Helen and Denise, you can jump in. The teacher pipeline is a group of individuals, as Denise described to you, from key organizations in the territory that are at this moment identifying key issues that the 4 areas in the teachers pipeline have reflected in the territory. Recruitment is a big aspect of it, and what is being done is that with the Human Resources Office of the Department of Education, some information, data is being gathered. I think that what kind of technical assistance is needed once the recommendations come up, I can guess that the data gathering and support to have that data analyzed will be a big effort. Then the RELNI can support the territory with that, as well as other organizations. Some revisions or conversations about the regulations that attend the certification process for teachers and leaders is another aspect that has been discussed. So it's soon to determine what specific technical assistance, but we can anticipate that's facilitating discussions and analyzing data and helping in determine what kind of data will be needed is some of the support that will be needed. Ramona is asking to Helen and to Denise about the work on CTE. That was her question. So, Helen, do you want to?
Sure. I'll begin from my perspective, and then maybe Denise, you can kind of chime in with specifically what's going on in the VI with CTE. But I think one of the things I want to point out as part of another project that I've been working on in another jurisdiction, we actually did a survey of prospective employers, of thousands of prospective employers, using the employability skills framework that was developed by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Career and Technical and Adult Education. And it was really interesting. We asked both about entry-level employees and more experienced employees where the skills gap may exist and what their desired skills, what the most desired skills were. And, you know, it's really interesting because I think a lot of times what we hear is that, you know, we need more students with STEM skills, more students with STEM skills. And, you know, while I can't argue with that, what we found in our survey is the most frequently cited skills employers are looking for are employees, prospective employees who can read and write. So communication skills are paramount, regardless of whether you're in a STEM field or not. Other areas that employers pointed to were non-academic skills, such as personal responsibility, integrity, those kinds of things. So, I guess I want to highlight the fact that, literacy is not something separate from CTE. It needs to be embedded in the work that CTE teachers are doing as well. So Denise, I don't know whether you want to kind of weigh in on the role that CTE teachers are playing in the teacher pipeline work that you've been doing there.
Well, I think that the CTE teachers have a lot to offer to the whole process, because a lot of our CTE manuals are written at a level that is already extra challenging for our students. And so to give them the strategies that they'll need to help our students attack that text is going to be critical. Also, in terms of the P16 collaborative, Department of Labor is going to play a critical role in helping us decide what programs our CTE department should be offering to our students, so that we can be preparing our students for jobs that are available and in demand in the Virgin Islands as well.
Well, I just want to add, Denise, to what you said and comment that, a lot of times CTE teachers have a very clear sense of how the academic skills that students are gaining are applied in the real world. And again, that's an important aspect of literacy instruction, right?
Sorry, correct? That's correct.
Well, we have a couple of more minutes left in the webinar, and I haven't seen any additional questions from the room in the chat. If you are thinking on something and we run out of time, feel free to send us your comments. I provided you my email at the beginning is saespada@gmail.com, or you can access us through the RELNI web, www.relni.org, and we can certainly address your question or provide you with more information. There is an assessment of this event that is needed for us to evaluate our work and also to enhance future events such as this. You will be receiving an email from us on that assessment, and we will really appreciate if you take a few times on your day and respond to it. We really use the feedback to our work. We have let me go back because Ramona was typing something. Oh, it was a thank you. Thank you, Ramona. And thank you all for your participation. Thanks to the UBI technical staff for the support. Everything worked pretty well, at least on my part here in Puerto Rico. And I think that from the individuals in other states and in Guam, I hope that this has been a useful presentation. Thanks, Helen, for your time in preparing it, and we can continue this conversation in the USVI or in another peer exchange network in the near future, I hope. Enjoy the rest of your meeting in the VI, and thank you again for participating in this webinar.
On behalf of the REL Northeastern Islands, thanks everyone for joining us today. In a couple of weeks, you will receive a thank you email from us with a link to the webinar archive, and we appreciate your completing the feedback survey. Have a good evening, everybody, and you can disconnect.
Thanks, everyone.